Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. It's Christmas Eve. It's not actually Christmas Eve because we taped this a little early, but it's Christmas Eve. So I'm wearing my Christmas plaid. It's very exciting, very festive. I have a Christmas tree, wreaths. Yay. It's like you're celebrating with me. Thank you for joining us today, or likely after Christmas Eve, which is probably most likely when you're going to be listening. Today, we are talking about a few different things. So one of them is going to be a New Year's resolution for 2021 around spending plans. We're also going to be talking to those seniors who are about to press submit on most of their regular decision applications. We have some tips for you on the regular decision process. But before we get to either of those, I'm excited to welcome my colleague, Lauren DiProspero. Lauren is a former director of admissions for both Columbia and Stanford's medical schools. And she is bringing us the latest in our med school series, and that's on post-baccalaureate programs. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Beth.
All right, well, thanks for joining today. So why don't we start with the most basic thing of all, which is, what is a post-baccalaureate program?
Yeah. So you may hear about postbacs aimed at different disciplines. Certainly, once I became aware of them for medical school, I kind of started seeing them everywhere. But for the purposes of our conversation, we're going to focus on those that prepare students for primarily medical or dental school.
Okay.
And then within that category, there are two types of programs. There's career changers and record enhancers.
Got it. All right. So you kind of, I'm guessing you just laid out who the people who might take the post-bac path. So maybe why don't we start with the career changers? So what makes them want to do this program?
Yeah, so for the career changer programs, this is typically a student who comes to realize their interest in medicine or the healthcare field later. Maybe
Right.
they were a junior or senior in college who got some sort of exposure to medicine. Oftentimes it's people who worked for a few years in a completely unrelated field that felt they needed the change or realized that they did want to go into the more hands-on part of medicine. These are students that typically have few or no science classes. So this is really someone who's kind of starting from scratch with this process. For those that are interested in the academic record part of things, this is typically a student whose undergraduate cumulative GPA, science GPA, because in medical school, they use two different GPAs, that's maybe not competitive for medical school or is not as competitive as you would like. You know, there are students that are maybe missing a few classes, maybe need to retake a few science classes, you know, one or two. Those are really students that would be best benefited as a non-degree student at a nearby college. This type of program is really aimed at those who need more than those few classes and would benefit from a structured curriculum and advising situation.
Right. And actually, it's a really good distinction to make because we talked about what a post-bac program is, but it is true, right, that you could simply go and take the required science courses at a local college. These programs that we're talking about today, you apply for them. And when you enter, it's all structured and set out for you. So rather than trying to figure out how to get those classes in at the local school, this is, you put everything to the side and you do this post-bac program.
For
Typically.
some of them, for typically that's what you see. You can find ones where you still stay in the workforce. You can find ones where, you know, it is part-time, but it is also not necessary to do a post-bac program to achieve the strong science record and research and you know, clinical exposure that's required to apply to medical school. You can do that on your own. These are just programs that really provide that great structure because it is a hard path to take without any sort of support in that way.
Right, because a lot of students, to your point, for either one of these groups of students, they didn't follow this path while they were undergrads. They weren't taking necessarily advantage of the advising that might have been available to them as undergrads for whatever reason. I actually know someone who did a post-bac program who entered college with a goal of going to medical school and just kind of, I think she would say she got distracted. She, you know, she had every intention and then she went a different path and got really interested in something else. And as a result, her science, she just didn't get it in. But that also meant that she didn't take advantage of what our other peers who were applying directly in medical school did. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the pros and cons, because obviously these can be great, but they're not necessarily the perfect solution. Nothing is the perfect solution. So
Right.
in terms of those who are looking to change careers, what do you see as the cons and then the pros of this program?
Yeah. So I think that the big con for most, at least working adults, is that many, but not all, but many of these programs require students to step out of the workforce and focus solely on preparation for medical school for the length of that program, which is typically 1 to 2 years. So that's a really big commitment, not just in terms of funds for paying for this, but
Right.
also time and just the ability to really focus on this. And additionally, some of these programs can be really competitive to get into.
Yeah.
There aren't that many slots. There's a lot of interest, especially in the more competitive schools. But there are a lot of benefits to that type of program, right? Because they provide that structured curriculum. They help students find research and clinical experiences. And then I think one of the biggest benefits is that some of these programs, a lot of them provide what are called linkage programs. And a linkage program is a formal agreement that allows highly qualified students in that post-bac program to link to a medical school before they complete their post-bac program. So typically what happens if you don't have a linkage program is that you're going to have to take a year between your post-bac program and starting medical school because of when the process of applying to medical starts and happens. You wouldn't have the grades. Like there's a lot of things that need to happen. And so by linking through the medical school that's linked, in some of these have multiple medical schools that you could choose from,
Right.
and you do have to be nominated. It's a whole process, but that allows them to skip that gap year that follows the post-bac program and go directly into medical school that fall.
Got it.
And so some of the career changer programs, there are a lot more than this out there, but I figured I'd kind of throw
Yeah,
out a few
let's
names.
give us some examples. I think that would be
Sure.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. So Bryn Mawr College, which is outside Philadelphia, University of Louisville, University of Colorado Boulder, UC Berkeley Extension, Washington University in St. Louis are just a few of those examples. Like I said, there's certainly more, but I want to highlight a couple just as a baseline for people to start researching if they are interested in the career changer.
Right. And just to clarify, because you did mention that with the linkage programs, you have to be nominated, there's a whole process. So by that, I'm inferring that getting into the post-bac program doesn't mean that you then will automatically link with a med school program. Would that be
Correct.
accurate? Okay.
Yeah, correct.
Got it.
That process typically happens in the fall. It'll vary school to school in their agreements with medical schools. So, it is not automatic. It doesn't mean that you won't get into medical school eventually by doing a post-bac, especially the more selectives are going to, make sure that you'll be a competitive applicant and help you navigate that. But it's not a guarantee that you would do a linkage program or that you would be interested in any of the schools that they're linked with.
Right.
There's also that side of it as well.
Exactly. That makes sense. Okay. So then we talked about the career enhancers. Let's talk about those who are looking for record enhancement. Sorry, the career changers. Now we're talking about record enhancers. What are the pros and cons for them?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I'll start with the benefit on this one.
Okay.
The main benefit, I think, of the record enhancement programs is the structured curriculum, the advising, and they also do sometimes have linkage programs. There's a lot of flexibility through night classes, number of classes each semester that can allow students to continue to work. I think that the con is that, if you didn't do well in your science classes in undergraduate, you're going to want to really consider how well you may do in a post-bac program, right?
Right.
Thinking about what are the reasons that you struggled, right?
Yes.
Are those reasons gone or are they addressed? Will you be able to succeed in this program, right? And the answers to those questions are going to be different for every student. But I think really kind of soul searching before laying out the money to take a few classes, are you really going to be able to be successful in these programs?
Right. I mean, before you lay out the money, before you take time away from whatever career it is that you're building. Last week's show, one of the questions we were answering listener questions, and one of the questions came from a mom whose daughter struggles in math, but her ultimate goal is medical school. And so she had some questions around the math curriculum that her daughter was thinking about for her junior and senior year. and because she's going to apply to some BSMD programs, but there's some big questions there. Math is going to be a really important component. And if that's an area she struggles in, I also think, if that's a struggle, is that really going to be an appropriate career if you're going to get into a career that requires math, right?
Right.
And I would say the same
absolutely.
for science. You know, if you're not great at science, is it because it's just not your favorite? Well, that's also a problem.
A big problem.
A big problem, right? Maybe
Yeah.
you love it, but for whatever reason, it doesn't love you back. And then that's another problem, right?
Exactly.
So really good advice.
Exactly.
You know, beyond everything, what we're always, I feel like, even if this isn't accurate, but I feel like one of the goals that we have with the podcast is to help people kind of make realistic choices and be honest with themselves, be honest about what you can afford, be honest about your record and what really, how competitive or not you're going to be with some schools. And that would translate to this as well. You may have long harbored a desire to be a doctor. You may still, but if over time you have shown to yourself again and again that this is not an area where you excel, it's probably time to find. And we want you to do that before you spend a lot of money on a post-bac program.
Exactly. And actually, we have a blog post series going on allied healthcare fields, alternatives to the patient care aspect of things that would still allow, people who still want to be in the healthcare field, be a part of it, but maybe medicine isn't that, maybe nursing isn't that, that can allow them to still work in that field, because it is a huge field with a lot of different jobs. So I would encourage our listeners, if they're interested in that, even at the high school level, please take a look at that. I think it'd be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, massive. And I think that people tend to think of, when you think of the law profession, you think of lawyers. When you think of the medical profession, you think of doctors and nurses. But you're right in that this is a massive industry with so many different ways in which you could be involved in it and contribute and help people. It doesn't have to be with a scalpel in an operating room or, seeing patients in your office on a regular basis. So that's not going to be right for everyone. So you gave us some examples of universities that had some good career changer post-bac programs. What are some examples you might give for the record enhancers?
Yeah, absolutely. UC Berkeley Extension, they have both.
Okay.
American University, St. Xavier University, Temple University, and Washington University in St. Louis, which I actually really like using as an example, because their post-bac program is designed to really support a wide variety of students entering the field, night classes, flexibility. But I also like it because it is a highly selective university, but within their post-bac program, I don't want to say that they're not selective. They want students to succeed and will make sure that you're able to do the work. But they have such a wide variety of opportunities that I think it's just a good reminder to research a variety of programs to see what fits your name and not to dismiss something because of a name.
Got it. Right. Not to think I'm never getting in there, so you dismiss it. And by the same token, not considering a program because maybe it's not got a brand name that you are super familiar with.
Exactly.
And actually, this leads me to a question that I have, which is, will the post-bac program specifically spell out we are for career changers or we are for program enhancers, so record enhancers?
Yeah, I would say that the career changers are very explicit about that. They are going to say that you are somebody who does not have many science classes. They'll probably have a cutoff for what they will allow you to have had. Maybe it could be distance from college as well. If you're 10 years out, maybe they would still consider you a career changer, even though you had some science. So really looking at those details, they'll say that on the admissions website, what they're looking for. And I would also very much encourage anybody who's thinking about this to reach out to their admissions officers. They will be able to tell you all about what are the requirements, what's included. You can ask to speak to current students, all of those things. They really want to be talking to you to make sure that this is a right fit for you. They don't want to admit somebody who this isn't, they're not seriously considering it or thinking through the different parts of it. So do engage with them.
Yeah, and you actually had shared some additional resources, and I was hoping you could share some of those with our listeners right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're still in college, you're late in college, or even if you're just thinking about pre-med, I always say talk to your pre-med advising. talk to your career advising. If you've already graduated, most schools will support students and alumni, so don't hesitate to reach out. If your advisors, maybe your school doesn't have the right types of advisors, there is an organization of health professional advisors, the NAAHP, that has volunteer advisors, has some FAQs on post-bac programs. And then the AAMC, which is the organization that oversees medical school admissions and a whole bunch of parts of medical school in general, has a searchable database of post-baccalaureate pre-med programs.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with our listeners about the post-bac program?
Yeah, I think it's just spend the time reflecting, making sure that this is the right choice for you. Speak to advisors, speak to family and friends. It's a big commitment.
Yes.
So just making sure that you're really thinking through and deciding, is this the right path for me?
Awesome. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about New Year's resolutions around spending for college. So don't go away.